@NCERT video welcomes you. Today we are going to start Chapter 7 India's Cultural Roots. Let's start Chapter 7 India's Cultural Roots. That which cannot be stolen, that which cannot be confiscated by rulers, that which is not a burden as it does not weigh anything. That which, though it is used, only grows every day. That is the greatest wealth of all, the wealth of true knowledge. Subhasit, wise saying. A rishi from Hampi, Karnataka. The Buddha from Bhutan. Mahavira from Bihar. The big questions. 1. What are the Vedas? What are their message? 2. What new schools of thoughts emerged in India in the first millennium BCE? What are their core principles? 3rd, what is the contribution of folk and tribal traditions to Indian culture? Indian culture, by any estimate, is several millenniums old. Like any ancient tree, it has many roots and many branches. The roots nurture a common trunk, and from the trunk emerge many branches, which are different manifestations of Indian culture, yet united by a common trunk. Some of these branches are about art, literature, science, medicine, religion, the art of governance, martial arts, and so on. There are also schools of thought, by which we mean groups of thinkers or spiritual seekers who share their similar ideas about human life, the world, etc. Spiritual, concerned with the spirit or soul, Atman in Sanskrit and many Indian languages. Spirituality is the search for a deeper or a higher dimension beyond our current personality. Seeker, someone who seeks the truths of this world. This could be a sage, a saint, a yogi, a philosopher, etc. Many archaeologists and scholars have pointed out that some of the India's cultural roots go all the way to the Indus or Harappan or Sindhu Saraswati civilization, which we visit in the chapter 6. Later on, over time, hundreds of schools of thoughts emerged in India. We will see here a few early schools which have shaped India into a country with a unique personality. By understanding them and their roots, we can understand India, that is Bharat, better. The Vedas and Vedic culture. A. What are the Vedas? The word Veda comes from the Sanskrit Vid, which means knowledge, hence Vidya. For instance, we briefly mentioned the Rig Veda in earlier chapters. In fact, there are four Vedas: the Rig Veda, the Yajur Veda, the Sam Veda, and the Athar Veda. They are the most ancient text of India, and indeed among the most ancient in the world. The Vedas consist of thousands of hymns, prayers in the form of poems and songs. that were recited orally, not written. Those hymns were composed in the Sub-Sindhva region, which we visit in Chapter 5. It is difficult to say when exactly the Rig Veda, the most ancient of the four, was composed. Experts have proposed dates ranging from the 5th to the 2nd millennium BCE. So, for anything between 100 and 200 generations, these texts have been committed to memory through rigorous training and passed on orally with hardly any alterations. Don't miss out. This meticulous transmission over thousands of years explains why in 2008 UNESCO recognized Vedic chanting as a masterpiece of oral and intangible heritage of humanity. UNESCO stands for United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization. It promotes dialogue between people and nations through education, science, and culture. The Vedic hymns were composed by rishis, male seers, or sages, and risikas, female ones, in an early form of the Sanskrit language. They were addressed in poetical form to many deities, gods, and goddesses, such as Indra, Agni, Varun, Mitra, Saraswati, Usha, and many more. Together with the seers, these deities sustained rhythm or truth and order in human life and in the cosmos. Cosmos, the world or the universe as an ordered and harmonious system. The early rishis and rishikas saw these gods and goddesses as one, not separate beings. As one famous hymn puts it, Ekam Sat Vipra Baudha Vadanti. The existence, that is, the supreme reality, is one, but sages give it many names. In this worldview, some values were especially important, beginning with truth, which was often another name for God. The last mantras verses of the Rig Veda also call for unity among people. Worldview, a certain view or understanding of the world, its origin or its workings. Come together, speak together, common be your mind, may your thoughts agree, united be your purpose, united your heart. May your thoughts be united, so all may agree. B. Vedic Society. Early Vedic society was organized in different jans or clans, that is, larger groups of people. The Rig Veda alone lists over 30 such jans, for instance, the Bhartas, the Purus, the Kurus, the Yadus, the Durvasas, etc. Each clan was associated with a particular region of the northwest part of the subcontinent. You can see a written Upanishads between 1500 BCE and 500 BCE, that is around 1000 BCE. You can see Vedic school of thoughts emerged around 500 BCE. Just before 500 BCE, you can see birth of Buddha and Mahavira. You can see on timeline it is written 1 CE and 500 CE. Not much is known of how these jans governed their society. The Vedas only give us a few clues through words like Raja, a king or ruler, Sabha, and Samiti, both of which refer to a collective gathering or assembly. Many professions are mentioned in the Vedic texts, such as agriculturist, weaver, potter, builder, carpenter, healer, dancer, barber, priest, etc. Healer, someone who uses traditional practices to relieve or heal diseases. Let's explore. Do you know the term for a society where people select their leaders? How do you think people can benefit from such a situation? What could happen if they live under leaders that they did not choose? Hint: think back to what you are learning in the theme Governance and Democracy. Write your thoughts in a paragraph of 100 to 150 words. C. Vedic schools of thought. Vedic culture also developed many rituals. Yajna, often read as yagya, directed towards various deities, gods, and goddesses for individual or collective benefit and well being. Daily rituals were generally in the form of prayers and offerings to Agni, the deity associated with fire, but those rituals became more and more complex in the course of time. A group of texts known as Upanishads built upon Vedic concepts and introduced new ones such as rebirth, taking birth again and again, and karma, our actions or their results. According to one school of thought, generally known as Vedanta, everything, human life, nature, and the universe, is one divine essence called Brahman, not to be confused with the god Brahma, or sometimes just Tat. Tat. Two well-known mantras expresses this in a simple but profound way. Aham Brahmasmi. I am Brahma. That is to say, I am divine. Tat Tavam Asi. You are that. The Upanishads also introduced the concept of Atman or self, the divine essence that resides in every being, but is ultimately one with Brahman. It follows that everything in this world is connected and interdependent. This explains a common prayer that begins with Sarve Bhavantu Sukhina or May all creatures be happy and goes on to wish them all to be free from disease and sorrow. Think about it. Have you heard or read any other story that conveyed an important message? What values did it teach you? Early in the first millennium BCE, several more schools of thought grew out of the Vedas. One of them was yoga, which developed methods intended to achieve the realization of Brahman in one's consciousness. Together, these schools of thought became the foundation for what we call Hinduism today. Consciousness, the quality or state of being aware, for instance, of something within oneself. Buddhism. Other schools of thought also emerged, which did not accept the authority of the Vedas and developed their own systems. One of them is Buddhism. About 2.5 millenniums ago, a young prince named Siddhartha Gautam was born in Lumbini, today in Nepal. Depending on the sources they use, scholars have come up with widely different conclusions as regards the precise year of his birth. In Chapter 4, we choose 560 BCE as an approximate year. In any case, it makes no difference to our story here. Many stories from the Upanishads tell us the importance of asking questions, whether these questions come from men, women, or children. Shwetketu and the seed of reality. Chandogya Upanishad. Rishi Uddalak Aruni sent his son Shwetketu to a Gurukul to learn the Vedas. When Shwetketu returned 12 years later, his father realized he had become very proud of his learning. So Uddalak tested him with questions on the nature of Brahma, which Shwetketu could not answer. Uddalak proceeded to explain how Brahm, though invisible, is everywhere, just as the seed of a banyan fruit seems empty when you open it, but already contains the future banyan tree, or just as all kinds of different pots can be made out of the same clay. Similarly, everything around us has emerged from the same essence, Brahm. He concluded his teaching with these words: everything consists of this subtle essence. You are that Shwetketu. Nachiketa and his quest. Katha Upanishad. Once a man was giving away all his possessions in a ritual. As his son Nachiketa kept asking him which god he would be offered to, the father became angry and answered, I give you to Yam, that is the god of death. Nachiketa then proceeded to Yam's world and, after a long wait, met the mighty god. One question was on his mind: what happens after the death of the body? Yam tried to avoid answering, but the boy persisted. Pleased, Yam explained that the Atma or self is hidden within all creatures. It is neither born nor does it die. It is immortal. Having acquired this profound knowledge, Nachiketa returned to his father, who welcomed him joyfully. The debate of Gargi and Yajnavalkya. Vrihad Ranakya Upanishad. Once, the wise king Janak announced a prize for the winner of a philosophical debate. Yajnavalkya, a renowned rishi, came to the king's court and defeated many scholars until Gargi, a rishika, asked him a series of questions on the nature of the world and finally on the nature of the Brahma. At that point, Yajnavalkya asked her to stop asking further questions. Later, however, Gargi resumed her questions and Yajnavalkya went on to explain how Brahm is what makes the world, the seasons, the rivers, and everything else possible. As the story goes, then Siddhartha Gautam grew up living a protected life in the palace. One day, At the age of 29, he asked to be driven through the city in a chariot, and for the first time in his life came across an old man, a sick man, and a dead body. He also saw an ascetic who appeared to be happy and at peace. Following this experience, Siddhartha decided to give up his palace life, leaving behind his wife and son, traveling on foot as an ascetic, meeting other ascetics and scholars. He searched for the root cause of suffering in human life. After meditating for many days under a peepal tree at Bodh Gaya, today in Bihar, he attained enlightenment. He realized that avidya, ignorance, and attachment are the source of human suffering and conceived a method to remove these two causes. Ascetic, someone who engages in a rigorous discipline to attain a higher consciousness. Attachment, the condition of having a bond with someone or something, usually through sentiment or habit. Siddhartha then became known as the Buddha, which means the enlightened or awakened one. The Buddha started teaching what he had realized, including the ideas of ahimsa, which is generally translated as non-violence, but originally means non-hurting or non-injuring. He also insisted on a sincere inner discipline. The following saying of his expresses this simply: not by water is one made pure, though many people may bathe here in sacred rivers, but one is pure in whom truth and dharma reside. Conquering oneself is greater than conquering 1,000 men on the battlefield 1,000 times. The Buddha founded the Sangha, a community of bhikshus or monks, and later bhikshunis or nuns, who dedicated themselves to practicing and spreading his teachings. His influence on India, and indeed the whole of Asia, was enormous, as we will discover later. It is still perceptible today. Monk, a man who, giving up the usual life in the world, dedicates himself to religious or spiritual pursuits. A monk usually takes vows, that is, commits himself to follow strict rules for a disciplined life. Nun, the female equivalent to a monk. This stone panel, some 1800 years old, shows the Buddha teaching. Let's explore. Discuss the way the Buddha is depicted in the above panel. Can you name some states of India or some other countries where Buddhism is a major religion even today? Try to plot these on a world map. Jainism. Jainism is another important school of thought that became widespread at the same time, although its roots are said to be much more ancient. Just like Siddhartha Gautam, Prince Vardhaman was born in a royal family in the early 6th century BCE. His birth was near the city of Vaisali in modern day Bihar. At the age of 30, he decided to leave his home and go in search of spiritual knowledge. He practiced an ascetic discipline and after 12 years achieved infinite knowledge or supreme wisdom. He became known as Mahavira or Great Hero and started preaching what he had realized. A traditional painting of Mahavira. Don't miss out. The word Jain or Jaina comes from Jina, meaning conqueror. This does not refer to the conquest of territory or enemies, but the conquest of ignorance and attachment, so as to reach enlightenment. Jain teachings include ahimsa, anikantvad, and aparigraha. These ideas, shared to a large extent with Buddhism and the Vedantic school of thought, are central to Indian culture. The first may be illustrated by this saying of Mahavira: all breathing, existing, living, sentient creatures should not be slain, nor treated with violence, nor abused, nor tormented, nor driven away. Let us define the last two in simple terms. Anekantvad means not just one aspect or perspective, that is, the truth has many aspects and cannot be fully described by any single statement. Aprigraha means non possessions and advises detachment from material possessions, limiting oneself to what is truly necessary in life. Jainism also insists on the interconnectedness and interdependence of all creatures, from humans to individual organisms, as they support each other and cannot live without one another. Scientists studying nature, flora, and fauna have again and again confirmed this deep truth. The Jataka tales, which have delighted generations of Indian children and adults, tell stories of the Buddha's former births and expresses in simple terms the Buddhist values. In a well-known tale, the Buddha was the king of a large troop of monkeys. They lived near a huge tree which bore fruit of divine fragrance and taste. Despite the Monkey King's instructions that no fruit should escape, one day a ripe fruit fell into the stream below. Carried by the current, it was caught in a net and taken to the palace. The king was so enchanted by its taste that he ordered his soldiers to locate the tree it came from. After a long search, they found the tree and the monkeys enjoying the tree's fruits. The soldiers attacked the monkeys. The only way for the Monkey King to save his monkeys was to help them cross the stream. But they could not do so on their own. Being much larger than them, the Monkey King caught hold of a tree on the other bank and let them use his body as a bridge to cross the stream. Although he was severely bruised in the process and eventually died. The king, who watched the scene from a distance, was greatly moved by the Monkey King's selfless sacrifice. He thought about the role of a king with respect to his subjects. A stone panel at Bharuch in Madhya Pradesh depicting the story of the Monkey King. A Jain story. Rohineya was an extraordinarily skilled burglar who evaded all attempts to catch him. On his way to a city, he accidentally heard a few sentences from a sermon that Mahavira was giving about achieving liberation from the ordinary life of ignorance. Reaching the city, Rohinaya was recognized and arrested. He pretended to be a simple farmer. A minister devised a clever plan to force him to confess his identity. But Rohinaya, remembering Mahavir's word, was able to detect the minister's plan and defeat it. Feeling remorseful, Rohinaya approached Mahavira, confessed his crimes, returned the stolen treasures, and asked for forgiveness. He became a monk, realized the illusion he was living in, and focused on acquiring higher knowledge. The story illustrates the importance of right action and right thinking, and also illustrates the fact that everyone should have a second chance. Let's explore. Observe the above panel from a Jain temple in New Delhi. What is striking about it? What messages does it carry? You can see a lion and a cow eating in a same pot. Think about it. In both Buddhism and Jainism, ahimsa means much more than refraining from physical violence against a person or an animal. It also means refraining from violence in thought, such as having ill feelings towards anyone. If we observe ourselves carefully, we may notice such negative thoughts and learn to turn them into positive ones. Sometimes such negative thoughts are even directed at ourselves. In both Buddhism and Jainism, monks and sometimes nuns too began traveling across the land to spread their respective teachings far and wide. Some of them created new monasteries in faraway places, while others led ascetic lives in the caves cut in the rock. Archaeological findings have revealed many traces of those monasteries, sometimes even the names of the monks who lived in the rock cut caves and slept on the stone beds. Caves cut into the rock at Ellora, Maharashtra, between the 6th and the 10th century CE. Some of the caves are Hindu, others are Buddhist and Jain. Think about it. In English, Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, and Sikhism are often labeled religions. You may notice that we have avoided this term, preferring schools of thought, and later in this chapter, belief systems. This is because there are many aspects to those schools and systems, which we will explore gradually. A philosophical aspect, a spiritual aspect, a religious aspect, an ethical aspect, a social aspect, to name a few. Many scholars agree that the word religion is too limiting in the context of the Indian civilization. There were yet other schools of thought at the time. For example, one of them, known as the Charvak school, sometimes also Lokayat, believed that this material world is the only thing that exists and therefore there can be no life after death. This school does not seem to have gained much popularity and it disappeared with time. We mention it to show that there was a wide diversity of intellectual or personal belief systems. People were free to choose what suited them. Although the Vedic, Buddhist, and Jain schools had important differences, they also shared some common concepts such as dharma, karma, rebirth, the search for an end to suffering and ignorance, and many important values. This is the trunk of the tree we started this chapter with. Folk and tribal roots. The cultural roots we have seen so far are well documented in many texts. India has also had rich oral traditions, that is, teaching or practices transmitted through everyday practice without written texts. This is the case of the Vedas. Among them are numerous folk traditions, that is transmitted by common people, and tribal traditions transmitted by tribes. What are tribes? There are many definitions for this social entry. What are tribes? There are many definitions for this social entity. Today, anthropologists usually consider a tribe to be a group of families or clans sharing a tradition of common descent, a culture, and a language, living as a close knit community under a chief and holding no private property. Interestingly, ancient India did not have a word for tribe. Tribes were just different gens that lived in a specific environment, such as forest or mountains. The Constitution of India uses the terms tribes and tribal communities in English and Janjati in Hindi. According to official figures, in 2011, India had 705 tribes spread over most states, amounting to a population of about 104 million people, more than the populations of Australia and the United Kingdom together. In the 19th century, anthropologists studying tribes often described them as primitive or inferior to civilized people. With deeper studies of tribal communities and their rich and complex cultures, such biased judgments have been mostly abandoned. There has been a constant interaction between folk and tribal traditions and the leading schools of thought, such as those we mentioned in this chapter. Deities, concepts, legends, and rituals have been freely exchanged in both directions. For instance, according to tradition, Jagannath worshipped at Puri, Odisha, was originally a tribal deity. This is also the case with various forms of mother goddesses worshipped across India. Some tribes, on the other hand, adopted Hindu deities long ago and possessed their own versions of the Mahabharata and the Ramayana. This has been well documented from India's northeastern states all the way to Tamil Nadu. How have such interactions taken place for so long and so naturally? It is in the end because folk, tribal, and Hindu belief systems have many similar concepts. For instance, in all three elements of nature, such as mountains, rivers, trees, plants, and animals, and some stones, too are regarded as sacred because there is consciousness behind all of them. Indeed, tribes generally worship many deities associated with those natural elements. For the Toda tribal of Nilgiris of Tamil Nadu, for instance, one of them is pictured in the image on the right. Over 30 peaks of this mountain range are residences of a god or a goddess. Those peaks are so sacred that the Todas avoid pointing to them with a finger. But despite of this multiplicity of deities, as with Hinduism, many tribal groups have a concept of a higher divinity or supreme being. For example, several tribes of Arunachal Pradesh worship Doni Polo, a combined form of the sun and the moon, who later rose to the higher status of a supreme god. This is also the case of the god Khandoba in parts of central India. In eastern India, the Munda and the Santhal tribes, among others, worship Singhbunga, a supreme deity who creates this whole world. There are many more such examples. The Indian sociologist Andre Bethele summed up this situation in these words: the thousands of castes and tribes on the Indian subcontinent have influenced each other in their religious beliefs and practices since the beginning of history and before. That the tribal religions have been influenced by Hinduism is widely accepted, but it is equally true that Hinduism, not only in its formative phase but throughout its evolution, has been influenced by tribal religions. Clearly, the result of this long interaction has been mutual enrichment. In this manner, folk and tribal beliefs and practices also count among India's cultural roots. We will further develop this point in the next chapter. Before we move on, the Vedas, India's earliest texts, gave rise to several schools of thought. Vedanta and Yoga are amongst the best known. Buddhism and Jainism departed from the authority of the Vedas and laid emphasis on some specific values and practices. Although these schools had important principles and methods, they also shared some important concepts. They were all looking for the cause of suffering and the means of removing ignorance. Tribal belief systems and art have interacted for millenniums with Hinduism. There was a free borrowing and giving from every side. Tribal belief systems generally regard the land and its features as sacred. They often have, at the same time, a higher concept of divinity. Questions, activities, and projects. 1. If you were Nachiketa, what questions would you like to ask Yam? Write them down in 100 to 150 words. 2. Explain a few central ideas of Buddhism. Briefly comment upon them. 3. Discuss in class the quotation of the Buddha which begins with, "Not by water is one made pure." Though many people may bath here in sacred rivers to make sure that its meaning has been understood by all. 4. Explain a few central ideas of Jainism. Briefly comment upon them. 5. Consider and discuss in class Andre Bethle's thought, see page 122. 6. Make a list of popular gods and goddesses in your region and the festivals they are associated with. 7. As a class activity, list 2 or 3 tribal groups from your region or state. Document some of their art and belief systems. True or false? 1. The Vedic hymns were written on palm leaf manuscripts. 2. The Vedas are India's oldest texts. 3. The Vedic statement Ekam Sat Vipra Baudha Vadanti reflects a belief in the unity of cosmic powers. 4. Buddhism is older than the Vedas. 5. Jainism emerged as a branch of Buddhism. 6. Both Buddhism and Jainism advocated for peaceful coexistence and the avoidance of harm to all living beings. 7. Tribal belief systems are limited to beliefs in spirits and minor deities. Class activity 1. Stage a small play with Yam, god of death, surrounded by several Nachiketas asking him questions about life. The banyan tree is an apt illustration for the themes in Chapter 7 and 8, and a fine symbol for Indian civilization. With its deep root system, massive trunk, and branches spreading in all directions, it can extend to a vast area and last for many centuries. It shelters a variety of flora and fauna and encourages its branches, though united at the trunk, to throw fresh roots from their own. Indeed, Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism regard the banyan tree as sacred. For more videos, you can subscribe NCERT video. Thank you.